My name is Alex, and I'm a realtor. Or, I used to be. Now I'm just hiding. It all started with a house. Not just any house. This one was different. It sat at the very end of a long, lonely road called Whisperwood Lane. The name sounded nice, like a place from a fairy tale, but there was nothing nice about it. The house was old, made of dark wood that looked gray under the cloudy sky. It had 2 floors, big windows that looked like empty eyes, and a wide front porch with a single rocking chair. The trees of the forest grew right up to the backyard, their branches like long bony fingers reaching for the roof. It was completely isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor. I took the job because I needed the money. Business was slow and my bills were piling up. My job was simple: find tenants for the house on Whisperwood Lane. The owner wanted someone to live there for at least a month. 1 month. That was the magic number. I didn't understand why, but the pay was too good to ask too many questions. I was supposed to collect the rent, check on the property, and make sure everything was in order. It sounded like the easiest job in the world. But from the very beginning, something felt wrong. Every time I drove up that long, quiet lane, a shiver would run down my spine. The air grew colder and the world seemed to hold its breath. The house itself was always clean, too clean. It was fully furnished with old dark furniture, a big dining table, a sofa covered in a white sheet, and beds with perfectly made blankets. But there was no dust, not a single speck. It was like no one had ever lived there, or maybe someone was cleaning it constantly when I wasn't around. The strangest part was the feeling inside. It was a heavy, silent feeling, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that listens. I would walk through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floors, and I always felt like I was being watched by the house itself. My main task was to show the house to potential renters. I tried to make it sound appealing. Look at this amazing view of the forest. It's so peaceful and private here, a perfect escape from the noisy city. People were often interested because the rent was surprisingly low for such a big place. I would walk them through the chilly rooms, forcing a smile on my face. But deep down I felt like I was lying. I was selling them a dream, but I had a growing fear that it was actually a nightmare. And soon, I would learn just how terrible that nightmare could be. The job came to me in a very unusual way. I didn't find an ad online or in the newspaper, it found me. One rainy Tuesday, the phone in my small office rang. It was a number I didn't recognize with no caller ID. I almost didn't answer, but I was desperate for work. "Hello, Alex Carter Realty," I said, trying to sound professional. The voice on the other end was low and raspy, like stones grinding together. It was a man, but his voice was strange, almost metallic. He didn't say hello or introduce himself. He just said, "You are a realtor. You need a job. I have one for you." His words were slow and deliberate, and they sent a chill through me. He told me about the house on Whisperwood Lane. He said he was the owner, but he was very busy and lived far away. He needed someone local to manage it for him. He explained the duties: find a tenant, sign a 1-month lease, and that was it. He never told me his name. When I asked, he simply said, "Just call me the owner." He told me he would handle all payments in cash. He said a package would be delivered to my office, and I should use the money inside for my commission and the first month's deposit. I was skeptical. Who pays in cash without even meeting you? It was all very mysterious and a little bit scary. The next day, a plain brown box was sitting on my office doorstep. There was no return address. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there were stacks of $100 bills, neatly wrapped in rubber bands. It was more money than I had seen in months. There was also a single old-fashioned iron key, and a note. The note was written in elegant, spidery handwriting. It said, "This is your commission for the first 3 tenants. Find them quickly. Deposit the rent in this box and leave it on the porch on the 1st of each month. I will collect it." It felt like a deal with a ghost, a secret agreement that nobody else in the world knew about. Against my better judgment, I took the job. The money was too tempting to refuse. I told myself it was just an eccentric rich man who valued his privacy. I called the owner back on the strange number to confirm I had received the package. He didn't sound pleased or surprised. He just said, "Good, do not fail me. The house does not like to be empty." That last sentence stuck with me. The house does not like to be empty. What did that mean? It sounded like a threat, but I pushed the thought away. I had a job to do, and I was determined to do it right. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. My first tenants were a retired couple, the Hendersons. They were sweet gray-haired people who wanted a quiet place to spend a month away from their noisy grandchildren. They loved the house immediately. Mrs. Henderson admired the antique furniture, and Mr. Henderson was excited about the forest. He said he wanted to go for long walks and watch birds. They seemed perfect. They were quiet, respectful, and paid the rent on time with a cheerful smile. I gave them the iron key and watched them carry their 2 small suitcases inside. They waved at me from the porch as I drove away, looking happy and content in their new, temporary home. I checked in with them once, about a week later. I called their cell phone and Mrs. Henderson answered. She sounded happy. "Oh, it's just wonderful, Alex," she said. "It's so peaceful here. We haven't seen another soul. It's like we have the whole world to ourselves." She told me her husband was spending all his time in the woods, exploring the trails behind the house. I felt a sense of relief. Everything was going smoothly. The job was as easy as the owner had promised. I put the house out of my mind and focused on other things, happy to have the commission in my bank account. The month passed quickly. On the last day, I drove out to Whisperwood Lane to collect the key and inspect the property. I expected to see the Hendersons packing up their car, ready to leave. But when I arrived, their car was gone. The house was silent. I knocked on the front door, but there was no answer. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast quiet. I tried the doorknob, and it was unlocked. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was immaculate, the beds were made, the floors were clean, and the sheet was back on the sofa. There was no sign that anyone had lived there at all. I searched the entire house. All their things were gone, their suitcases, their clothes, their books, even the half-eaten box of cookies Mrs. Henderson had on the kitchen counter. It was as if they had never been there. I checked the closets, the drawers, everything. It was all empty. I thought it was strange that they left without saying goodbye or leaving the key, but I figured they were just in a hurry. I found the key sitting on the kitchen table, right in the center. I locked the door, feeling a little unsettled. I called their phone later that day, but it went straight to voicemail. I never heard from them again. A few weeks later, I found my second tenants. They were a young couple, both writers named Sarah and Ben. They thought the isolated house was the perfect place to work on their novels without distractions. They were excited by the story of the house, its age, and its remote location. "This place has so much atmosphere," Sarah had said, her eyes wide with inspiration. "I can already feel the ideas flowing." Ben nodded in agreement, taking pictures of the dark woods with his phone. They were full of creative energy and optimism. They moved in with 2 laptops, 3 boxes of books, and a coffee machine they said they couldn't live without. Just like with the Hendersons, I called them after about a week to see how they were settling in. Ben answered the phone, and he sounded a bit different from when I had met him. His voice was tired. He said the house was a little too quiet and that the silence was making it hard to concentrate. He mentioned that Sarah was having trouble sleeping. She kept saying she heard strange noises at night, like whispers coming from the forest. I tried to reassure him, telling him it was probably just the wind in the trees. He didn't sound convinced. The call left me with a small, cold knot of worry in my stomach. At the end of their month, the same thing happened. I drove to the house on the last day of their lease, and their car was gone. The house was still and silent, looking just as it had before they arrived. I knocked, then called out their names, but only the echo of my own voice answered me. The door was unlocked again. I stepped inside, and my heart began to beat a little faster. It was exactly the same as with the Hendersons. The house was perfectly clean, the beds were made, and the furniture was all in its proper place. There was no sign of Sarah or Ben. Their laptops, their boxes of books, even their precious coffee machine, all gone. It was more than just strange now, it was deeply disturbing. 2 sets of tenants had now vanished without a trace, leaving the house in an unnaturally pristine state. The iron key was sitting in the exact same spot on the kitchen table. I picked it up and it felt cold in my hand. I walked through the silent rooms, the feeling of being watched stronger than ever before. I tried calling Sarah and Ben, but their phones were turned off. I sent them emails, but I never got a reply. They had simply disappeared, swallowed up by the silence of Whisperwood Lane. I knew I should have stopped then. I should have called the police. But I didn't. My fear was growing, but so was my need for money. The owner had called me again, his raspy voice seeming to come from a great distance. "The house is empty," he said. "It wasn't a question. Find another tenant." I hesitated, but the thought of that cash waiting for me pushed my doubts away, so I put the ad up again. A few days later, a man called. He said his name was Julian. He wanted to see the house immediately. When he arrived for the viewing, I felt a jolt of unease. He was a pale, thin man, maybe in his late 20s, with dark tattoos covering his neck and arms. He wore a large silver ring in his ear that glinted in the dim light. Julian didn't say much as I showed him the house. He just walked through the rooms with a slow, deliberate pace. His eyes, which were a very light blue, seemed to look past the furniture and through the walls. He didn't care about the kitchen or the bedrooms. He was only interested in one thing, the view from the back porch. He stood there for a long time, staring out at the dense, dark forest. "I need to get away from my past," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the trees. "This is good. This is quiet. I love the view." He agreed to rent it on the spot, pulling a thick wad of cash from his pocket to pay for the month. I felt a new level of dread as I handed him the iron key. There was something about him, a strange calmness that seemed out of place. He didn't have much baggage, just one large duffel bag that he slung over his shoulder. He told me not to bother him. He said he wanted to be left completely alone for the entire month. He wanted no calls, no visits. "I'll leave the key on the table when I'm done," he said, as if he already knew the routine. As I left, I saw him go back out to the porch, sit in the old rocking chair, and stare into the forest as if he were waiting for someone. 2 weeks went by, not the full month, just 2 weeks. I couldn't stop thinking about Julian and the house. His request for complete isolation made me more nervous, not less. I fought the urge to call him every day. Then one morning I had a feeling, a terrible sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. I knew something was wrong. I drove out to Whisperwood Lane, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His old beat-up car was gone. I walked up to the silent house, my heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't even bother to knock. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, preparing myself for the familiar chilling emptiness. And that's exactly what I found. Everything was gone. This time, the emptiness felt different. It was heavier, more final. The house was spotless, of course. The floors shone, the furniture was perfectly arranged, and the air was still and cold. But Julian had only been here for 2 weeks. It hadn't even been a full month. The pattern was broken, and that scared me more than anything. I walked through the silent rooms, my footsteps the only sound. I checked the bedroom he had used. The bed was made with military precision. The closet was empty. I looked in the bathroom. The counter was wiped clean. There wasn't a single hair, a drop of water, or a forgotten toothbrush. He had vanished completely. I started to panic. This wasn't normal. People don't just disappear. Not 3 times in a row. Not from the same house. The Hendersons, Sarah and Ben, and now Julian. All of them gone, along with every single one of their belongings. It was as if the house itself was erasing them, wiping away any evidence that they had ever existed within its walls. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I was the one who brought them here. I had taken the owner's strange money and ignored all the warning signs. These people's disappearances were my fault. I was an accomplice to whatever terrible thing was happening in this place. The silence of the house was deafening. I stood in the living room looking at the pristine furniture and the dust-free surfaces. It was a stage, perfectly set for the next act, the next victim, and I was the one who said it. I remembered the owner's words, "The house does not like to be empty." Was this what he meant? Did the house consume people? The idea was insane, but what was the alternative? That 3 separate sets of tenants had all decided to secretly move out in the middle of the night, leaving no trace and never contact me again? That seemed even more impossible. The house was the only constant, the house was the problem. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. I thought about the owner, the raspy voice on the phone, the cash deliveries. He knew what was happening here. He had to. He wasn't just an eccentric landlord, he was part of this whole nightmare. I looked for the key, and just like before, it was sitting on the kitchen table. I picked it up, but this time I didn't leave. I couldn't. The cycle had to stop. I couldn't let anyone else move into this house. I had to figure out what was going on, even if it meant putting myself in danger. The pattern of emptiness had to be broken. A few days later, a young couple called me. They had a baby. They saw my ad and said the house on Whisperwood Lane sounded perfect for their little family. They wanted to escape the city for a month. Hearing the sound of the baby cooing over the phone made my blood run cold. I couldn't do it. I couldn't lead them to this place. I imagined their small, happy family being erased, their laughter replaced by this horrible, listening silence. I told them I would call them back, and then hung up the phone, my hand shaking. That night, I decided I had to go back to the house. I had to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. I drove down Whisperwood Lane under the black, moonless sky. The forest on either side of the road was a wall of impenetrable darkness. I parked my car a short distance away and walked the rest of the way, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path in front of me. The house looked even more menacing at night, a dark shape against the slightly less dark sky. I used the iron key to unlock the door, the sound echoing loudly in the dead quiet. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping across the clean, empty rooms. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, and I had to fight the urge to run back to my car. I searched the house from top to bottom looking for anything out of place. I pulled back the sheets on the furniture, looked under the beds, and checked inside every cabinet. Nothing. It was as perfect and empty as ever. Then I remembered Julian. He loved the porch. He spent his time sitting in that old wooden rocking chair staring into the woods. I went outside, the damp night air clinging to my skin. The rocking chair was still, waiting. I ran my flashlight over it, examining every inch of the wood. At first I saw nothing, but then, my light caught a tiny glint of silver. Stuck in a crack between the seat and the armrest was a piece of jewelry. It was Julian's large, silver ear piercing. My heart leaped into my throat. But that wasn't the worst part. Attached to the silver ring was something small, pale, and grotesque. It was a piece of an ear. It was rotten and bloody, and I felt sick to my stomach. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. As I bent down to pick it up, its beam slid across the floorboards under the chair. There, carved deep into the wood, was a strange symbol. It was a circle with a jagged line through it, something ancient and evil. I had found my evidence, but I had also found something much worse. I stared at the symbol, horrified. It looked like something from a nightmare, a mark of pure evil. My mind was reeling. The ear, the piercing, the symbol. This was proof. This was real. This wasn't just a series of strange coincidences. Something violent and terrible had happened here. Julian hadn't just left. He was taken. He was a victim of whatever dark power resided in this place, a power that demanded a price, a sacrifice. And the symbol felt like its signature, a brand marking its territory. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a fear so intense it was hard to breathe. I had to get out of there. I had to get to the police. Just as I stood up, a sound drifted from the forest. It was faint at first, and for a moment I thought I was imagining it. It was laughter, a low, chuckling sound. It wasn't a happy sound. It was cruel and mocking, filled with a terrible glee. It sounded like it was coming from deep within the woods, but it was growing louder, closer. The laughter echoed through the silent night, bouncing off the trees surrounding the house. It was the sound of something inhuman, something ancient and hungry, and it knew I was there. It was the sound of the thing that had taken the Hendersons and Sarah and Ben and Julian. Panic seized me. I scrambled backward, away from the porch, away from the woods. The laughter grew louder and louder, a chorus of insane joy that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. It was inside my head, clawing at my sanity. I didn't wait for another second. I turned and ran. I fled through the house, not daring to look behind me. I burst out the front door and sprinted down the driveway toward my car, my lungs burning. The laughter followed me, chasing me, nipping at my heels. It was a wild, terrible sound that promised a horrible end. I felt like if it touched me, I would be torn apart. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door and locked it. The laughter was right outside the car now, a deafening roar of malicious delight. I jammed the key into the ignition and floored the gas pedal. The tires screamed on the gravel as I sped away from the house on Whisperwood Lane, my eyes wide with terror. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I just drove as fast as I could away from the darkness, away from the house, and away from that awful, endless laughter. The next morning, I went to the police. I was a mess. I hadn't slept, and the sound of the laughter was still ringing in my ears. I told them everything. I told them about the owner, the cash, the disappearing tenants, and what I had found on the porch, the ear, the piercing, and the symbol. I probably sounded crazy, but I didn't care. I showed them the address on Whisperwood Lane. 2 officers went to investigate the house. I waited at the station for hours, pacing back and forth, my nerves completely shot. I expected them to come back with evidence to confirm my story. When they returned, their faces were blank. They said they had found nothing. The house was clean. There was no rocking chair on the porch. There was no bloody ear piercing, no rotten piece of flesh, and no strange symbol carved into the wood. The floorboards were old but completely unmarked. They told me it was an empty, dusty old house and that I must have imagined it all. They said my story was unbelievable. They couldn't trace the owner's phone number, and without any evidence or missing persons reports, there was nothing they could do. They looked at me with suspicion, as if I were the one who was unstable. I left the station feeling defeated and more scared than ever. That afternoon, I called the couple with the baby. I told them the house was no longer available. I told them there was a plumbing issue, a foundation problem, any lie I could think of. I couldn't explain the truth, but I made sure they would never go near that place. Then my phone rang. It was the number with no caller ID. It was him. My heart stopped. I almost didn't answer, but I knew he would just keep calling. I shakily raised the phone to my ear. "The deal is off," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm not finding you any more tenants. Stay away from me." The owner's raspy voice was cold and sharp. There was no surprise in it, only anger. "A pact was made," he hissed. "The house must be fed. The rent is due." Then he said something that made my blood freeze in my veins. "If you cannot bring it a tenant, it will collect the rent from you." Then he laughed. It was the same horrible, mocking laughter I'd heard in the woods. It filled my ear, my head, my soul. I screamed and threw the phone across the room, shattering it against the wall. But I couldn't escape the sound. The pact would be enforced, the rent would be collected, and I was the only one left to pay it.